Wake up one morning and suddenly it's fall. It feels like fall. I don't know how long that will last. Glad to have everybody here this morning. We're in the book of 1 Peter. You may have heard that Rita had a stroke last week, and she's doing pretty well. They're going to try and get her home this week or in a few days with the therapy and stuff. Main problem is that when you have a stroke, you get a little nervous and scared and depressed. So y'all would pray for her in that aspect, but she's doing pretty good. When she walks, she tends to lean to the right. That's better than the left, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm thinking politics there. She does, but that's what they're working on. And so we're very thankful that she came through that scare okay. We're going to finish up the second chapter, get into the third chapter this morning of 1 Peter. Again, this is all about behavior that he's writing about here. And in verse 17, it says, honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Honor all men. Boy, that's a tough one. We talked about that. I'm not exactly sure how far down we read, but who would like to read 18 through 20? Christy?
Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering, because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God.
Okay. I think we talked about this last week, but we'll talk about it a little bit again because it's important. Parents, have you ever punished a kid because he thought he did something wrong? Turns out he didn't. It happens. It happens. And if that kid takes that punishment without too much of a fuss, aren't you really kind of proud of that kid being able to do that? That's the way God is with us. Okay? He wants us to be able to, if we have and he's talking about our relationship here would be an employee-employer deal. If we get punished, so to speak, however that might be, and for something we didn't do, and we take it calmly, God likes that. But if we retaliate and rebel against that, what does that kind of bring us back to? An eye for an eye, doesn't it? And so that's not what Christianity is all about. And so he says, if you take it patiently when you do well and suffer for it, this is acceptable to God. And he's going to explain why now shortly in these next verses. Okay, because there's always a lesson in what's happened here, and he wants us to know what he's talking about here. So who'd like to read verses 21 through 25? Lord.
For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. He himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sins, might live for righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls.
Okay, thank So now he's saying, this is acceptable to God, and here's your example, Jesus Christ. He was innocent. They hung him on the cross, beat him, spit on him, did all this stuff. Now, y'all, what happens if somebody spits on you?
Probably deserve it.
Chances are that you don't. I have never in my youth especially, I did not take that well. If somebody did that. There was going to be a big discussion if they did that. I had an awful time following Jesus' example on that. Think about it. He's the Son of God. Somebody spits on him. What can he do? He could call down an angel and zap that guy right there on the spot, scaring everybody to death, and he wouldn't have to go suffer another ounce of pain. But he didn't do it. That's our example. That's why it's tough. I always say you can't be a sissy and be a Christian. But a lot of people look at Christians in that frame. But you can't. You got to have a lot of courage to be a Christian. It's just the way it is. That's his example. And this isn't just Peter saying this. Of course, he's inspired. But Paul, gave that same, in Ephesians 6, verse 5, the same example talking about employers, employees, or slaves and masters. And so this is important. Who's a good example of somebody? When Jesus was on the cross, what was the one thing that really sticks out in your mind that he did? Father, what? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. What's another example of somebody that did that? Stephen. What was happening to Stephen when he did it? Getting stoned. And they weren't throwing pea gravel at him either. I mean, he was getting hit. He was dying. Did the same thing. That's not in our nature, is it? Self-defense is in our nature, isn't it? You hurt me, you better get ready. But this is the example for the cause of Christ. He says in verse 25, you were sheep going astray, but now return unto the shepherd and the bishop of our souls. Now, we know about, the Jews, they wandered and did their thing. But I think here in particular, he's talking about Gentiles. Let's look at Romans chapter 1. Who'd like to read verses 19 through 23? Romans 1, 19 through 23. Somebody have that? Well, I do. I'll read it. Because that which may be known of God is manifest, or made known in them, that God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations. Their foolish heart was dark, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into the image made like unto corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. So here Paul is talking to the church at Rome, talking about how the Gentiles, migrated from, should know God, but they made him into, like in Egypt, had the birds, the ibis was a god, and all these things. Horus had a horse's head, this type of thing. And so what Peter's here they're saying, he said, but you were a sheep going astray, but now you've returned unto the shepherd and the bishop of your souls. How did they return? obeyed the gospel. That's how they returned to the bishop of their souls. And that's the way it was for each one of us, wasn't it? Those of you, before you obeyed the gospel, did you have something that you just spent your time mostly and that kind of became your God? Did you have something that just kind of stuck with you? And that gathered all your attention? You don't have to answer. But for some, it might have been liquor. Some, it might have been something else. Some of it might have been... there's just a whole... I mean, we could look up a scripture that has the list of sins that we could run into. But we all were astray, weren't we, at one time? And so we obeyed the gospel, as Dan said. Now we've returned to the shepherd and bishop of our souls. Is there any other shepherd or bishop of our souls? None that I know of. Any comments to chapter 2? Dan?
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that here Peter is teaching them this, and he was the first one to draw the sword when they came to arrest Jesus.
Very good point. Very good point.
You can see how he evolved from what he was then, and he had been with the Lord for two and a half years or whatever, but yet he drew the sword. But now he's totally on the opposite side of the spectrum now with what we should do.
That absolute instinct to, leave my Savior alone. And so he knows better now. We just sang a song, I sing praises to your name. And singing's good, but how else can we show praises to his name? By behaving this way, right? By behaving this way and letting people know why we behave this way. Sure.
It is important for us, seems like the world's getting awfully politically correct, that, when we truly want to give God all the glory, probably have to give him the glory, and we have to do it verbally.
Yep.
And, we need to, we don't have to make a big spectacle of it, but in conversation, saying, just tell me, I've been praying a lot about, that's giving God the glory. Saying, God must have really been with me on this day because I really struggling, and then all of a sudden it just got better. And just little things like that.
Sure. And if we're open about letting people know that, hey, I can't do this tonight because I'm going to church. Got to do, can't do this going to church. People know that that's what you do, and you may not think of something to say at the time when you are behaving properly or doing something, but people are going to figure it out. Okay. They're going to stop cussing in front of you or apologize and this type of thing without having to make too much of an issue of it. But you're right, whenever we can, verbally let her out there. I'm glad you said something about politically correct. Because in chapter 3, we're going to get into some stuff that's not politically correct. There's nothing politically correct about the Bible. It's God's book. He lays it out there, so it's not politics. This, politics is just not a good thing anyway. Isn't our country just a really good example of that right now? So anyway, who would like to read verses in chapter 3? Are there any other comments on chapter 2? Yep.
I'm just thinking, when you're talking about how hard it is to have someone, for example, spit in your face and then not to retaliate, I'm thinking how much harder it would be to have someone do that to a loved one of yours and for you not to retaliate on their behalf.
Yeah, and boy, and there you get into some discussion, because protecting your loved one, that's a godly thing. And we're going to kind of get into that here in a little bit. It's ourselves as personal that we don't do things that we shouldn't do, you know. And that's why we have the military. That's why, you know, we got Christian soldiers like Cornelius, because defending and protecting your loved ones is important. Now, if somebody spits on you because you're a Christian, that's a game changer there too. A lot of what he's talking about here, especially this thing of if you suffer unjustly, and using Christ as an example, is because pretty soon they're going to start undergoing this persecution that Nero started. Okay? And he's getting them ready for that. Okay? And so that's part of that. Anything else? Okay, who'd like to read verses 1 through 6, chapter 3? Debbie? Oh, wait a minute. Did you have something?
No, I was just going to raise my hand. since
She
you
was
did.
first.
Go ahead.
Likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may, without the word, be won by the conversation of their wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair, and of wearing of gold or putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner in the old time the holy women also, who trusted in God, adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands. How far down?
6.
Okay. Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters are ye, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement.
Okay, thank you. And then, just to show the harmony between Paul and Peter, would somebody look to 1 Timothy 2, verses 9 and 10? 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10. Somebody like to read that? I'm going to volunteer Ryan since he had his hand up a minute ago.
Let's see if I can find it in time.
Right before 2 Timothy.
You'd think I'd know that, right? 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10.
Yes, sir.
Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness.
Okay, thank you. How popular is that statement, wives be in subjection to your husband, in today's society?
I think our society looks at the word submission and they automatically associate with that if a person is in submission to someone else, then the other person is domineering. You know, they automatically put those two together and they don't understand really what submission or subjection
And unfortunately,
is.
there have been Christian husbands that have taken that
I
attitude.
will agree with that.
Okay? Now, what's really good here that Peter has done is used Sarah and Abraham as an example. Okay? Sarah called him Lord. However, so we understand these relationships, let's look at Genesis 21. Genesis chapter 21, and I'd like somebody to read verses 10 through 12. Actually, 9 through 12 would be fine. Bryce?
And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, an Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, daughter. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be here with my son, namely with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad, or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called.
Thank you. So now Sarah called Abraham Lord, but what did she just do? She said, Abraham, get that woman out of here and her kid. I don't want her around because she's over there making fun of me. She's mocking me. Abraham, get her out of here. He didn't want to. He didn't want to. He says it's very grievous in Abraham's sight. But then God said unto Abraham, don't let this be grievous because of the lad and because of your bondwoman. In all that Sarah has said, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall your seed be called. Now, I know there's a lot of things that go along with that, but here's an example, though, of what God created woman, why? Be a helpmate. Helper. There's all kinds of ways you help. Dan, have you ever done anything stupid and Debbie redirected you?
Quite often.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Don't we? It's just like the president. Why does the president have a cabinet of advisors? He's in charge, but he's not a genius. He can't know everything. Okay? And there's just some things, Joyce will sometimes ask, would this be better for dinner or, and I have no idea. I don't do anything in the kitchen. I'm glad my son knows how to cook because I never did. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, there's a million different reasons why in Genesis chapter 2, God said, it is not good for man to be alone.
Yeah.
And that's why woman was created, because God saw that it was not good yet.
Yep.
And so that right there shows shows the value.
In Ephesians chapter 5, it talks about submission, but before it starts that conversation, it says submit one to another. Okay? And that means we listen. Men, yeah, we could, just like Abraham, he was in charge, but he had to listen. Okay? And men, if we don't listen to our wives, that makes us stupid. I'm sorry, I use words sometimes you don't want your kids to use. Like shut up and stupid, but sorry. Gayla?
This is kind of ironic because I'm kind of dealing with someone right now in a physical abuse situation happening for a while. Because listening to all this, and this is nothing really new, we've never read before, there's so much mutual love and respect and adoration between two people to have that submission operate the way God intended it to. Not just during the good times when things are flowing and they're leading, but when things rock. I brag a little bit. I probably have the most patient man in the world. And he didn't start out that way, but honestly, once we become Christians, and we talk about somebody changing, he's so laid back. But he knows how to deal with those situations, just like Abraham did in that situation. That he was split. He could have easily put his foot down and ruled that. However, he did. But he did love and take her and God in the middle of it to know how to handle that situation. The situation I'm dealing with goes like that a lot of the time. But when things go bad, they go real bad. So that mutual stuff stops.
Yeah. There's just so many examples that you can. They say opposites attract. It's kind of like you're using, and that works in relationships. Joyce is the high energy person in our family. I'm not, but I kind of, sometimes we settle back, and say, we talk things over and do these things. The thing about Abraham that we just read about in there was it grieved Abraham, but he didn't just come up and say, nope, not going to do it. He thought about it. Okay? It puts the onus on the men. You got to think every now and then. Tough. Lori, and then
I think it is also important to note that, Abraham did not want to do this. It was not until God told him, listen to your wife. And I think that puts a little bit more emphasis on it. It's not just an example of, okay, Abraham, he did what Sarah wanted. He was told to do what Sarah wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that we need to remember. We're not always going to be right, but it is that conversation and that communication and remembering that God wants that kind of a relationship.
and sometimes for us, we have this great book now that if we have trouble trying to make a decision, that we can go back and help us with. Terry?
To build on what Bill had to say just a minute ago, love and adoration, I think along with that you need admiration. If you go back and read the Song of Solomon about their relationship, there was a mutual admiration for each other there. They admired one another, not just in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense also. And when you see a husband or a wife bragging on his wife, that is bragging on one another. That is that mutual admiration. When that comes together, it's really beautiful.
One of the saddest things I ever saw, there was a gentleman that I worked with, and I noticed when he was with his wife, and nice gal, nice looking gal, but he had no respect for her at all, because she wasn't the sharpest tack in the box. And I guess he was looking for brains, I don't know, because he just had absolutely zero respect for her. And it was obvious in everything he said and did, even in public. And he ended up having an affair with somebody there at work. And it's just the saddest thing. When you see that, you don't have respect one for another. But that takes us back to verse 17 in chapter 2. Honor all men. Okay, when you see that word like men, you think in terms of mankind. But that takes in both sexes. Okay? And even if he wasn't married to her, okay, you still have to be, you honor people because they're precious souls. And I don't know, that was just a sad situation, because these things, what you're saying about is this honor and respect is very important in a relationship. Now, as we go on here, it says, whose adorning, let it not be, in verse 3, the outward adorning of plaiting of the hair. I'm not really sure what that is. Wearing of gold and putting on apparel. Now, this is not this is not a blast on jewelry. Okay? It's telling wives, okay, don't be known for your looks. Be known more, well, you can't help it if you're pretty. Okay? But be known for your good deeds. Be known for the good that you do, not for your fancy clothes or your jewelry or stuff like that. Be known for that. In other words, if somebody's coming down the street, I'll pick on Megan. Megan's walking down the street. I want to recognize Megan because she's a good girl. She does good things. She may be pretty. You're pretty. Okay? But that should not be the first thing that catches my mind. Don't get jealous, Bryce. Yeah, totally. Hardly even into that. Anyway, but you see, that's what Peter is saying here. For women, be known for what you do, not for what you look like and wear. In other words, there's a terminology you see at work a lot these days: form and function. okay? Don't be all form and no function. That really is good advice for men too, okay? You know, you gotta do stuff. You can't just look good, okay? Unless, of course, you're in sales. I'm just kidding. Dan's looking at me real hard there. But, you know, so that's what he's telling him there. And then he goes on to use the ladies from the Old Testament through verse 6. Any comments through verse 6? Deb?
It seems like a lot of the love verses, we consider that when it comes to other people, but when we're talking about spouses, for example, it would apply there as well. I mean, if their love the way God intends for it to be is we're seeking the other person's good at all times.
Exactly.
So if we're doing that collectively or then we would always be looking out for them, for the other guy.
You always look. I tell you what, sometimes though it can get in the way. Did you ever just say, "Hey, we want to go out to eat tonight"? Or where do you want to go? Well, I don't know. Where do you want to go? We're both seeking each other's good, and we can't get any, so we end up someplace like McDonald's or something. No, but you're absolutely right. Joyce does things. She's looking after me. I'm trying to look after her, and that's the way marriages are supposed to be. Any other comments? Okay, well, we'll start with verse 7 next week. I don't know who's the dinger, but